All right, so we're diving deep today, folks, into how toughness in the NBA has, well, kind of changed over time.
Yeah, definitely changed, that's for sure.
We've got this YouTube video, and it's jam-packed with examples from, like, all throughout NBA history.
Yeah, it's opinion-based, like the guy who made the video, he's got his own take.
Oh, absolutely.
But it gives us a good, like, starting point to really dig in.
Absolutely. And some of the stuff in here is going to, like, really surprise you. We're talking, like, cage matches,
Yeah. Wait.
flagrant fouls that wouldn't even be called today.
Right.
And even, like, how some of the legends, their ideas about defense may be a little skewed. So are you ready to, like, really have your mind blown about NBA history?
To do it, yeah.
Let's get into it. Okay, so first off, we got to go back to the very beginning. We're talking, like, the earliest days of basketball. And get this, the very first games played inside cages.
Inside cages, yeah.
Can you even imagine that?
I mean, it's crazy to think about now, right?
It's wild.
But there's a reason. So Naismith, when he invented basketball, he wanted it to be a less violent alternative to football.
Right. Makes sense.
But the fans, early on, they were still hungry for some rough stuff.
Like they wanted that physicality.
Yeah, they'd actually, like, storm the court and interfere with the game because of how rough the players were being.
Wait, so the cages were to protect the players from the fans?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's insane.
It was a wild time.
No wonder they called those guys cagers.
Right.
I mean, the source says the courts were covered in blood all the time. Like, that's a different kind of toughness than what we think of today.
Totally different. I mean, you got to wonder, like, how would a guy like Steph Curry, Mr. Finesse,
Right.
how would he survive in that environment?
Could you imagine Steph trying to shoot a three with, like, a mob of fans chasing after him?
It'd be a different game, that's for sure.
It would be a completely different game. Obviously, things had to change. The game couldn't stay that way forever.
Right.
So over time, they started introducing rules, trying to cut down on the violence, make it more structured.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, every rule change, even if it was meant to protect players, it had all these ripple effects.
Yeah. You change one thing,
It changes everything.
it changes how the game is played, how it's seen.
Exactly. So let's break down some of those big rule changes. First one, offensive 3-second rule. That came in 1936.
1936, yeah.
Think about what it must have been like before that rule. Guys could just camp out under the basket.
Oh, total chaos under there. Every rebound must have been a war zone.
It's hard to even picture that level of physicality. And get this, the flagrant foul rule didn't come in until 1980.
That late, huh?
Seems kind of late considering how rough things were in the early days, right?
You'd think so, but here's the thing. That first flagrant foul rule, it was basically useless. Like, it was treated the same as a regular foul, pretty much.
So no real consequence.
Not really, no. The only difference was the other team's coach got to choose who shot the free throws.
So strategically, there was no reason not to just, like, hammer a guy if it meant stopping him?
Exactly. That's why the 80s, even with the flagrant foul on the books, are still known for that, like, really physical, hard-nosed style of play.
Makes sense. So when did things actually change?
1990, that's when the NBA finally got serious. They made a flagrant foul, a two-shot penalty, plus the other team gets possession.
Okay, that's huge.
Huge difference. It changed defensive strategies overnight. Suddenly those hard fouls, way riskier.
You had to rethink everything.
Yep. Coaches, players, everyone. And that's when you started to see the shift away from that super aggressive style of defense.
So we've gone from cage matches to, I guess, somewhat tamer basketball?
Tamer, but still plenty physical.
Okay, now for something that really gets under fans' skin, even today. Flopping.
Ah, yes. The art of exaggerating contact to draw a foul. Amazing how flopping has stuck around,
It's crazy.
I mean, everyone hates it. The NBA tries to get rid of it, but it's still there.
This video, it traces the history of flopping all the way back to the 60s, mentions the Celtics player Frank Ramsey, called himself the master of deception.
Master of deception, huh?
Bragged about how the fans would boo him for his acting skills.
So even back then, players were figuring out how to, work the refs a little bit.
Oh, yeah, and then you've got Vlade Divac in the late 80s who took it to a whole nother level.
Deck, yeah. His falls, they were so dramatic, especially for a guy his size.
It was like watching a movie.
Made flopping way more noticeable. Some people even say he's the reason people think European players are soft.
Wow, didn't know that. So what did the NBA do about it? All this theatrics.
2012, they put in the no flopping rule, but it was pretty much a joke.
Didn't work.
Nope. Penalties were just warnings, and then maybe a small fine. Didn't scare anyone off, especially the big stars.
Yeah, the video says guys like LeBron and Chris Paul, they've never been fined for flopping in the regular season.
See, didn't work.
So they had to come up with something better, right?
And they did. 2023. New rule. Bigger fines, and now flopping gets you a technical foul. Means the other team gets free throws.
Okay, now that's actually a consequence.
Right. Actually changes the game.
Did it work?
Seems like it. In just half a season, more fines for flopping than in the last 11 seasons combined.
Wow.
So it's definitely making a difference.
But it makes you wonder, why do players even do it? Risk a technical, a big fine. Must be pretty effective.
Yeah, it is a good question. Is it weakness? Smart strategy? Or is it just because of how the game is reffed? Something to think about.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But for now, let's switch gears. Talk about how the stories around players and teams, they can change over time. Like reputations, legacies.
Yeah.
The video uses this example of the 1970s NBA. Apparently, it was surprisingly balanced. No real dynasties like we've seen in other eras.
Yeah, the 70s were interesting. You had injuries, trades that shook things up.
Yeah.
And no one team really stood out as, like, the dominant force.
Interesting. And like individual legacies, those can change too. They talk about Dirk Nowitzki. Early in his career, he was labeled a choke artist.
Oof, that's rough.
But then he leads the Mavs to a championship, changes the whole narrative around him.
Totally. It shows how one championship run can completely change how people see a player's whole career.
It's amazing. And speaking of championships, they compare Michael Jordan and Kevin Durant, how they got their rings. Very different paths.
Very different, yeah.
It brings up some big questions, like what actually makes someone a true champion? Does joining a super team, does that diminish what you achieved?
Yeah, those are the debates that keep us talking about basketball, right?
Exactly. Okay, get this. We're going back to the 60s, the era of the rebounding giants.
Wilt and Russell, oh yeah.
Their numbers are just mind-blowing. Wilt averaged over 20 rebounds a game for 12 seasons straight.
That's insane.
It's easy to think, oh, they must have been playing against smaller guys, but the video shuts that down right away. Average height of centers back then, same as it is now.
Really?
So how do you explain those crazy rebounding numbers? Well, you got to look at the context of the game back then. First off, no three-point line. Most shots were closer to the basket, more chances for rebounds.
Right, makes sense.
And those guys played crazy minutes. Wilt averaged, get this, 48.5 minutes a game in 62.
48.5?
Yeah.
That's almost every minute of every game.
Right. Today's players would be, like, dead. So it wasn't just about being big or strong. It was about playing almost every minute.
That's a different kind of toughness, for sure.
But there's more.
Yeah.
The pace of the game was way faster back then. More possessions, more shots. More shots means more rebounds.
Right. Makes sense.
In 62, teams were averaging almost 20 more shot attempts per game than they are today.
Wow.
And on top of that, shooting percentages were lower.
So you got a faster pace, more shots going up, and more misses.
Yeah.
It was a rebounder stream.
Exactly. It really puts those old rebounding numbers into perspective. It wasn't just individual talent. It was the whole way the game was played.
It's all about context.
So here's a question for you. Is it even fair to compare players across eras? Does context really matter when we're talking about who's the greatest?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Something to think about as we keep going on this trip through NBA history.
Oh.
This is a tough question for sure, but yeah, I think you got to consider the differences between eras. It's key to understanding how the games change, how the players have changed.
For sure. And speaking of teams and their journeys, this video takes us through, like, one of the most, I guess you could say, cursed franchises in NBA history, the Portland Trail Blazers.
The Blazers, yeah. They've got a history full of, like, what-ifs, almost moments. They won a championship in '77, but they haven't been back to the finals since.
And the video really paints this, like, kind of heartbreaking picture. Starts with Bill Walton, all his injury problems. He leads them to that championship, but then injuries, blames the team doctors, eventually forces a trade.
Losing Walton, that was a huge blow for them, yeah. Some fans say that's when the curse started, but I mean, they still had chances to rebuild, right?
Yeah. Right. They drafted Clyde Drexler in '83.
Clyde the Glide.
They make it back to the finals in '90 and '92, but they fall short both times.
Tough opponents in those finals. The bad boy Pistons, those guys were known for their physicality.
Borderline dirty, some people would say.
Yeah, for sure. And then Jordan's Bulls, right at the start of their dynasty. It shows you, even if you have a talented team, you need a little luck to win it all.
A little luck, right timing, all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, of course, there's the 1984 draft. Blazers pass on Michael Jordan to take Sam Bowie.
Oof, that one hurts.
I mean, talk about a what-if moment.
It's got to be one of the biggest draft blunders ever, right?
Yeah, Bowie's career, injuries just derailed it. And Jordan, well, he became Jordan. It's a decision that still haunts Blazers fans, I'm sure.
I bet.
But they had another chance, right? Late 90s, early 2000s, they build this stacked roster. Pippen, Rasheed Wallace, Sabonis, Stoudemire.
On paper, that team was built for a championship. But they couldn't quite get over the hump.
They choked. I mean, they had a 13-point lead going into the fourth quarter of Game 7 of the 2000 Western Conference Finals against the Lakers.
And they blew it.
It was brutal.
That game, it's like a symbol of Portland's playoff struggles. Some people even think the refs were rigged to favor the Lakers.
The source mentions those theories, too. Shows you how much that loss really got to people.
Yeah, whether you believe those theories or not, it's hard to deny they choked.
They choked. And then there were all the off-court issues. The Jail Blazers era.
Not a good look.
It's like every time they got close, something got in the way. And then, to make it even worse, they repeat their draft mistake in 2007. Pass on Kevin Durant to take Greg Oden.
Another one that's got to hurt.
Oden, injuries again? Durant, well, he becomes KD. It's like a pattern, you know?
It's tough to watch, honestly.
Yeah, you almost feel bad for Blazers fans. Almost. Okay, let's switch gears. Let's talk about a guy who, unlike the Blazers, consistently defied the odds. Wilt Chamberlain. The video dives into some of his, lesser-known achievements, games that are insane even by Wilt's standards, but somehow flew under the radar.
Yeah, it's easy to just get numb to Wilt's stats. They're so crazy. But some of those games, they deserve another look.
Absolutely. Like January 13th, 1962, Wilt scores 73 points, grabs 36 rebounds against the Chicago Packers. Not even his highest scoring game, but it just shows how dominant he was every single night.
It's wild. For him, 50, 60 points, that was almost normal.
Right. Just another Tuesday night for Wilt. And then his rookie season against the Pistons. 58 points, 42 rebounds.
Still the highest totals ever for a rookie in one game.
Unbelievable. He was a force of nature right out of the gate. Speaking of which, this next game is almost impossible to believe. Elgin Baylor, Game 5 of the 62 finals, drops 61 points.
61. In the final.
In the finals. On the road, Boston Garden, against the Celtics. And they still lost.
So close.
Yeah, they lost the game in the series, but Baylor's performance, it's legendary.
Totally. It shows you, even in defeat, there can be moments of pure brilliance.
Absolutely. It reminds us there are so many incredible stories and performances throughout NBA history, even beyond the ones everyone knows.
Yeah, like you dig a little deeper and you find all these hidden gems.
Right. Sometimes the most memorable games, they're the ones that kind of flew under the radar, like Rick Barry scoring 55 points in Game 6 of the 67 finals.
Rick Barry, wow.
He was playing with Wilt on the Sixers, but in this game, it was Barry who stole the show. Almost half his team's points, and they still lost to the Celtics.
Tough break.
Tough break, yeah. But it shows you, even in a loss, individual brilliance can shine through. And speaking of players who are often overshadowed, this video, it shines a light on some incredible talents who probably deserve more recognition.
Yeah, it's good to remember the guys who might not have gotten the same fame as the superstars, but were still incredibly impactful.
Right. Like the unsung heroes. First up, Sidney Moncrief. Two-time Defensive Player of the Year, played for the Bucks in the 80s. Elite defender, five-time All-Star, could score.
Moncrief, yeah. I remember him.
But he played in the same era as Larry Bird and the Celtics.
Tough competition.
And, well, Bird and the Celtics had his number, pretty much. They met 4 times in the playoffs, and the Celtics won every time.
Kept Moncrief from reaching the finals.
Exactly. It just shows you sometimes even the most talented guys, they can be overshadowed by rivals or just the circumstances of the time they played in.
Right place, right time. It matters.
Another example, Adrian Dantley. 2-time scoring champion, played for the Jazz in the 80s, super efficient scorer, known for his footwork, getting to the free throw line.
Dantley, yeah. He was a bucket.
But he played in a small market, never got the same recognition as some of his peers.
Sometimes that's all it is, being in the right market.
Then you've got Alex English, another scoring machine, played for the Nuggets in the 80s, 8-time All-Star, averaged over 25 points a game for 8 straight seasons.
Averaged 25 for 8 straight seasons. That's incredible.
Incredible, right? But never made it past the Western Conference Finals.
Sometimes it's just about the team around you,
And we can't forget Bernard King, 4-time All-Star, 2-time scoring champion, played for the Knicks in the 80s. Dominant scorer, but a knee injury in '85 really messed up his career.
That's tough. Injuries can just derail a career like that.
He came back, but he was never the same. Makes you wonder what could have been if he'd stayed healthy.
It's always a what if, you know?
So many what-ifs in NBA history. These are just a few examples of the guys who deserve more love for what they brought to the game.
It's a good reminder to look beyond the big names, you know? Appreciate the depth of talent that's been in the NBA.
Absolutely. And speaking of looking beyond the surface, this video dives into signature moves that people often get wrong. They think one player invented it, but it was actually someone else.
Yeah, sometimes the guy who made a move famous isn't the one who actually came up with it.
It's all about knowing your NBA history. Like, a lot of people associate the deep three-pointer with Steph Curry, right?
Yeah, Steph made it his own.
But he wasn't the first to shoot those bombs from way downtown. The video mentions Dan Majorly, played for the Suns in the 90s.
Thunder Dan Majorel. I remember him.
He was known for his long-range shooting, taking shots from, like, way behind the three-point line, years before Curry.
He was ahead of his time, kind of.
Exactly. And then you've got Orlando Woolridge. In the very first dunk contest, 1984, he does an East Bay funk dunk.
No way. I thought that was an Isaiah Ryder move.
Nope. Woolridge did it first, and then, like, Kobe made it famous later on. It's crazy how this dunk just went unnoticed.
Lost to history, kind of.
It shows you how some moments they can get lost, especially before we had social media and all that.
Yeah, back then, if you didn't see live, you might never see it.
Another move that's often misattributed, Dirk Nowitzki's fadeaway jumper.
Dirk's fadeaway, man. So smooth.
Iconic, right. But the video points out Wilt Chamberlain was already doing a similar fadeaway, like, decades before Dirk.
Wilt, man. That guy could do it all.
With his size, his wingspan, that fadeaway must have been impossible to block.
No doubt. It was a big part of his game, even in his 50-point-per-game season.
Crazy. And then, of course, you've got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook, one of the most recognizable shots in NBA history.
The skyhook. Untouchable.
But guess what? He didn't invent it either.
He didn't.
Nope. The OG skyhook master was George Mikan. Lakers legend, dominated the league in the 40s and 50s.
Wow. Didn't know that.
His skyhook was just as deadly as Kareem's.
That's amazing. It's like every move has a history, you know?
Totally. It's cool to see how these moves have evolved over time. Each generation of players, they add their own twist, take it to a new level.
It shows the creativity, the innovation in the game. It's never standing still.
For sure. Okay, get ready for a super fast overview of some of the key moments that shaped the NBA into what it is today. It's like a crash course in NBA history.
Sounds good.
So we got to start at the very beginning. 1891, James Naismith invents basketball.
Crazy to think. It all started with peach baskets and a soccer ball.
Peach baskets. Final score of that first game, 1-0. Can you imagine?
And now look at it. A global phenomenon.
From peach baskets to a global phenomenon. The video takes us through some of the big milestones. Dribbling becomes legal in 1892. First women's collegiate game in 1893.
Wow.
They introduced the backboard, the leather basketball.
Things we take for granted now.
Right. And then, you have all these early professional leagues popping up, eventually leading to the NBA in 1949.
The BAA and the NBL merging to create the NBA. A big moment.
Huge. The video says George Mikan, he becomes the league's first true superstar.
Mr. Basketball. He set the stage for everyone who came after.
And then 1954, they introduced the 24-second shot clock.
Speeds up the game, makes it more exciting.
Big change. Then you've got Bill Russell, drafted by the Celtics in 56.
Bill Russell, the legend.
Starts the Celtics dynasty.
Right.
11 championships in 13 seasons. It's a record that might never be broken.
Unbelievable. Led by Russell and coached by Red Auerbach, they set the bar so high.
And then, of course, Wilt's 100-point game in 62, something we'll probably never see again.
100 points in one game. It's mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing, right. And Oscar Robertson, he becomes the first player to average a triple-double for a whole season, also in 62.
The Big O. A true all-around talent.
Then in 76, you have the ABA-NBA merger. Brings together some of the most exciting players in the game.
A lot of talent coming together. Helps shape the NBA into what we know today.
This era also sees the rise of Julius Dr. J. Irving.
Dr. J.
Yeah.
His dunks, his moves, he was so ahead of his time.
He brought a whole new level of athleticism and showmanship to the game.
He was electrifying.
Then in the 80s, you have Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Their rivalry, it was epic. Brought the NBA back to life.
They saved the league, some people say. Brought in a whole new generation of fans.
And then in 84, the Bulls draft Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan. Need I say more?
The GOAT. He became a global icon. His dominance, his competitiveness, his skill. He transcended the sport.
He was more than just a basketball player. He was a cultural phenomenon.
And then in '92, you have the Dream Team.
The first Olympic team with NBA players dominated everyone.
Showed the world what the NBA was all about.
Yeah, they put on a show.
After Jordan retired, a new generation of stars came up. Kobe, Duncan, Shaq, Iverson, LeBron.
The torch was passed.
They kept pushing the boundaries of the game.
And then Steph Curry came along.
Steph Curry, the guy who changed the game with his three-point shooting.
Changed how the game is played, how it's taught, everything.
His impact is still being felt today.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how much the NBA has grown and evolved over the years. Okay, get ready for this. We're going to the 80s. An era that's often debated, sometimes misunderstood. This video, it helps us separate fact from fiction when it comes to the 80s.
The 80s, yeah, it was a different time.
So one of the biggest debates about the 80s, the defense. Older fans, they'll tell you defense was way tougher back then.
In my day.
But younger fans, they disagree. This video says both sides have a point, but you gotta look at the context.
Context is everything.
Like the pace of play was way faster in the 80s. More possessions, more shots, and yeah, more points.
And those shots were often coming off fast breaks, transition plays.
Easy buckets.
Higher percentage shots.
The highest scoring game in NBA history happened in the 80s. Pistons beat the Nuggets 186-184 in triple overtime.
186-184. That's insane.
Right. Shows you how high scoring the game was back then. And you also got to remember, there was no flagrant foul rule until 1990, so guys could get away with a lot more physicality.
Hard fouls were just regular fouls.
Yeah, the video talks about setting the tone, how teams would establish this level of physicality right from the start.
Let you know what kind of game is going to be.
And without a flagrant foul rule to stop them, guys were more likely to use that physicality, you know? So maybe the 80s wasn't a purely defensive era, but there was definitely a different level of contact allowed.
The rules were different, so the game was different.
Another thing people get wrong, athleticism. They think players in the 80s weren't as athletic as today's players.
That's a common misconception.
Yeah. And while it's true that training and nutrition are better now, leading to bigger, stronger, more agile players.
Right, that's undeniable.
The average height of NBA players in the 80s, same as it is today.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
The main difference was weight. Players in the 80s were about 14 pounds lighter on average. But that doesn't mean they weren't athletic.
No, not at all. There were some incredible athletes in the 80s.
This video, it shows some highlights of Dominique Wilkins, Spud Webb, Michael Jordan, Daryl Dawkins, Charles Barkley, Dr. J, Clyde Drexler. These guys could fly.
Yeah, they could move. You can't judge an era based on a few clips.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta look at the whole picture. Okay, ready for a topic that might get some Lakers fans fired up? Kobe Bryant's defense.
Kobe's defense, huh? That's an interesting one.
His offense, no question, he was one of the best ever. But his defense, it's a little more complicated.
He has 9 first-team all-defensive selections, tied with Jordan.
But he never won Defensive Player of the Year.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, the video points to his performance on the 2008 Redeem team as an example of his defensive potential.
The Redeem team, yeah. Stacked team.
He was surrounded by offensive superstars, so he focused on defense, shutting down the other team's best players.
He could definitely lock in when he wanted to.
But was he always that locked in? That's where the debate starts.
Consistency, that's the key.
The video compares Kobe to Jordan, who also has 9 first-team all-defensive selections. But when you look at the stats, steals, and blocks, Jordan has a clear advantage. Means he was probably more disruptive on defense.
The numbers don't lie.
Jordan averaged at least 2 steals a game for his first 9 seasons. Kobe only did that once in his whole career.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And Jordan holds the record for highest blocks per game average by a guard.
Jordan could get up there.
So, while Kobe could play great defense, the stats suggest Jordan was more consistently impactful on that end.
Makes sense.
But the video also says stats don't tell the whole story, especially with defense.
Right, there's a lot that doesn't show up in the box score, like good on-ball defense, forcing tough shots.
So, how do we judge Kobe's on-ball defense? Well, the video relies on the eye test, basically watching him play. Says Kobe was a much better defender early in his career before he started focusing more on offense.
Saving his energy.
Yeah. And they even quote Phil Jackson, Kobe's coach, during those championship years with the Lakers. In his book, Jackson actually criticized Kobe's defense.
No way, really.
Yeah. Said he gambled too much, got out of position, didn't always play smart defense.
Coming from Phil Jackson, that's got to sting a little.
Right. So it seems like Kobe was a very good defender, no question, but maybe not as consistently great as some other all-time greats.
It's all about nuance, right? Trying to understand the whole picture.
Absolutely. Okay, get ready for a whirlwind tour of some of the most memorable NBA debuts. The games where future legends first stepped onto the court gave us a taste of what was to come.
Debuts are always special, yeah. You can see the potential, the excitement.
Let's start with Magic Johnson. His debut, October 12th, 1979, against the Clippers. He started at shooting guard, believe it or not.
Shooting guards?
But he still put up 26 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 blocks.
It's a stat sheet stuffer from day one.
And he hit the game-winning shot with just seconds left. It was like a preview of his whole career.
Right.
5 championships with the Lakers.
Some guys just have that it factor, you know,
Yeah.
right from the start.
And speaking of it factor, Larry Bird also made his debut on October 12th, 1979.
Same day as Magic. What are the odds?
Crazy, right? 2 legends, same day. Bird's debut, it was more low-key than Magic's, but he still had 14 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists.
Solid.
Celtics won that game.
Of course they did.
Bird and Magic, they came into the league at the same time, breathed new life into the NBA. Their rivalry, it was epic. Their debuts, it was like the start of a new era.
The NBA was never the same.
And let's go back a few years. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, then known as Lou Alcindor, made his debut on October 18th, 1969.
Kareem, another legend.
He was just 22 years old, but he was already a beast. 29 points, 12 rebounds against the Pistons. The Bucks won that game.
The skyhook was already working.
Oh, yeah, it was there from day one. And then, of course, you've got Michael Jordan's debut, October 26th, 1984.
The day the world met MJ.
His debut, it was good, but not amazing. 16 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists.
You could see the flashes of brilliance, though.
Even in that first game, you could see he was going to be special. But there's this crazy story. He almost got seriously injured in that game.
Really? How?
He had a bad fall after a dunk attempt. Could have ended his career before it even started.
That's scary to think about.
Thankfully, he was okay. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Thank goodness for that.
Tim Duncan's debut was on October 31st, 1997. 15 points, 12 rebounds, 3 blocks. Spurs won that game.
Classic Tim Duncan. All about fundamentals, impact on both ends of the court.
He was the big fundamental from day one.
Always steady, always reliable.
And lastly, Kobe Bryant. His debut was November 3rd, 1996. He was just 18 years old.
18? Wow.
He only played 6 minutes, scored 1 point.
Not exactly a showstopper.
But even in those few minutes, you could see the confidence, the swagger. His career, it was a roller coaster, highs and lows. But his debut, it was the start of something special.
Kobe was one of a kind, loved by some, hated by others, but always captivating.
It's amazing to look back at these debuts, see how these guys first introduced themselves to the world.
It's like watching history unfold, you know?
Totally. Okay, now let's talk about endings. This video goes through some of the most memorable final games of NBA legends, how they said goodbye to the game.
Endings are always bittersweet, you know? Especially for these guys who have given so much to the sport.
Some went out on top, some faded away, some left us wanting more.
Yeah, there's no one way to say goodbye.
Let's start with Magic Johnson. His last game, June 12th, 1991, he announced his retirement earlier that season after testing positive for HIV.
Man, that was a shock.
It was. His final game was actually Game 5 of the finals against the Bulls.
Couldn't have asked for a bigger stage.
The Lakers lost the game and the series, but Magic still had a good game. 19 points, 11 assists, 5 rebounds. Not a storybook ending, but still a fitting farewell.
He went out playing the game he loved.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's final game was a little less glamorous. June 13th, 1989, Game 4 of the finals, Lakers getting swept by the Pistons.
Not the way you want to go out.
Kareem only scored 7 points. He looked all of his 42 years.
Father Time catches up to everyone, even the greats.
True. But let's look at some final games that were a bit more fitting, like Wilt Chamberlain. His last game, May 10th, 1973.
Wilt, what a career.
Lakers playing the Knicks in Game 5 of the finals. Wilt was 36 years old, playing on a bad knee.
Still battling.
He played all 48 minutes, had 23 points, 21 rebounds, 3 blocks.
A warrior to the end.
The Lakers lost the game and the series, but Wilt's performance, it showed he could still dominate.
He went out on his own terms.
Bill Russell's last game was one for the ages. May 5th, 1969, Game 7 of the finals, Celtics against the Lakers on the road in L.A. The pressure was immense.
Game 7 on the road against your biggest rival. Doesn't get much bigger than that.
But Russell, he did what he always did. He stepped up. 6 points, 21 rebounds, 6 assists. The Celtics won. Russell got his 11th championship ring.
The perfect ending to a legendary career.
The perfect ending. Michael Jordan's last game was a little more subdued. April 16th, 2003, regular season game against the Sixers.
So not a playoff game, not a finals game?
Nope, just a regular season game. Jordan was playing for the Wizards at that point, scored 15 points, Wizards lost.
Not exactly a storybook ending.
Not really, but it was still a chance for fans to say goodbye.
He'd already retired twice before, so it didn't have the same impact, maybe.
Right, but it was still a moment to appreciate his legacy.
He changed the game forever.
And then, of course, there's Kobe Bryant. His farewell, April 13th of 2016.
Kobe's last game, I remember watching that.
Unforgettable. Against the Jazz, he scored 60 points, led the Lakers to a come-from-behind win.
60 points in his last game. That's Kobe for you.
It was like something out of a movie, clutch shot after clutch shot. It was the perfect ending to his career.
He went out with a bang.
It showed everything he was about, the scoring, the competitiveness, the way he could just captivate the entire arena. He went out on his own terms.
It's amazing how these final games can really sum up a player's whole career.
It's true. They show their strengths, their weaknesses, their impact on the game. It's a reminder that even the greatest careers eventually come to an end.
But their legacies live on.
Absolutely. Through the memories, the inspiration, it's something special. It really is. It's like each final game, it's a story in itself.
All right, so shifting gears a bit, the source dives into signature moves. You know, those flashy plays that, like, become a player's trademark.
Yeah, the moves you think of when you hear a player's name. Exactly. But the video makes this point that sometimes the guy who made a move famous, he wasn't the one who actually invented it.
Right, sometimes it's more about who popularized it, not who originated it.
Exactly. Like, they use the example of the deep three-pointer. Everyone thinks Steph Curry shoot that.
Steph changed the game with that shot.
But he wasn't the first to shoot those bombs from way downtown. The video highlights Dan Majel, played for the Suns in the 90s.
Under Dan, yeah. He could light it up from deep.
He was known for shooting from, like, way behind the three-point line, years before Curry came along.
He was ahead of his time, for sure.
It's funny how a guy like that can be kind of forgotten, even though he was a pioneer.
It happens. The game moves fast, and sometimes those early innovators, they get lost in the shuffle.
Right. Another example, Orlando Woolridge. Believe it or not, he did an East Bay Funk dunk in the very first dunk contest back in 1984.
Wait, really? I thought that was an Isaiah Ryder move.
Yep, Woolridge did it first, years before Ryder or Kobe made it famous.
It's crazy how that dunk just flew under the radar. Like nobody remembers it.
Right. Makes you wonder how many other moves, moments have been lost to history, especially from those earlier eras.
It had a whole hidden history of the game waiting to be uncovered.
Another move that people get wrong, Dirk Nowitzki's fadeaway jumper.
Dirk's fadeaway, man. Unstoppable.
So iconic. But guess what? The video shows Wilt Chamberlain doing a similar fadeaway, like decades before Dirk.
Wilt, man. Is there anything that guy didn't do first?
Right. With his size, his wingspan, that fadeaway must have been impossible to block.
No doubt. It was a big part of his game, even when he was averaging 50 a game.
And speaking of iconic moves, we got to talk about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook, one of the most recognizable shots ever.
The skyhook. Nobody could touch it.
But, as the video points out, Kareem didn't invent it either.
He didn't.
The original skyhook master was George Mikan, another Lakers legend, dominated the league in the 40s and 50s.
Wow, I have no idea.
His skyhook was just as deadly as Kareem's.
It's like a basketball family tree. You know, these moves get passed down and evolve over time.
That's a great way to put it. So where does that leave us? We've talked about toughness, rule changes, dynasties, legacies. What's the big takeaway from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that NBA history is a lot more complicated than it seems.
More than just the highlights and the championship.
Right. It's about understanding the context, the personalities, the stories behind it all.
It's about appreciating all those layers, you know? The forgotten players, the evolution of the game itself.
And recognizing that toughness, it's not a one-size-fits-all concept. It's changed over time, been shaped by the rules, the strategies, the players themselves.
I like that. So one last thought for our listeners. If you could pick one current NBA player and send them back to that Cage era, who would it be? Who would survive? Who would thrive? Someone like Giannis with his size and athleticism? Or maybe a defensive genius like Draymond Green?
That's a tough one. Makes you think about how today's players would handle a totally different game, different rules, different everything.
It's a trip to even imagine. And on that note, we'll wrap up this depth dive. Hope you enjoyed exploring NBA history with us.
It's been fun for sure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep appreciating this amazing game we call basketball.